Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Lindsay Medlin. I am the content marketing producer here at Straightaway. And today my role will be helping Kelly facilitate her presentation. So I will be our technical director and I'll field some questions for her at the end. So with that being said, I will let Kelly take it away.
Okay, great. Lindsay, thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. My name is Kelly Prince. I'm a senior instructional designer here at Straightaway, and I'm really excited that everyone is here today to learn about what makes a great course. It's one of my favorite things to do and one of my favorite things to talk about, to share the knowledge I've gained over the years. So first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and my experience. We'll go over a brief agenda and then dive right into it. Okay, so about me, I am with the product team. So I work here at Straightaway, specifically working on our nurse aid training. And I've been in learning and development for about 20 years, 6 years exclusively in healthcare. I got a job doing healthcare learning, specifically senior care, and just fell in love. And every other job I've had since then has been in healthcare. I've got a master's in learning and technology and also my PMP. Won a few awards in the industry, and I've been a consultant creating learning solutions for Ernst & Young, the CDC, DaVita, the VA, and a number of other clients. So got a lot of experience, and one of my favorite things to do is share that experience with other people. So I'm really excited that we can talk about how to make a great course, and hopefully this information can help you with your own projects. All right, so this is basically our agenda. We've got about half an hour today, so I wanted to hit on the high notes of what a great course is. We're going to talk about 5 components of a great course. These are not all the elements, and they're not ranked in any order. It's just really important to make sure that you hit each one of these, and that's a really good blueprint for making a great course, whether it's instructor-led or e-learning or something like this that is a synchronous webinar. So these apply to really any medium. So you've got the right content. You use targeted learning outcomes. I've also called those objectives, but you'll see why outcomes is actually a better way to both analyze and describe what you're targeting. A great course is highly engaging, it creates connection, and it motivates learners. So these are the 5 things we'll be talking about today. And if you have questions anytime during the presentation, please just put those in the chat window. We will get to them at the end to make sure that we can cover everything. But I don't want you to forget your questions in case a slide brings something up, or if you just have a comment or want something clarified. Okay, so the first component, the right content. And instructional designers do something called an analysis to make sure that we are looking at what the right content is for the learner and for the subject matter. So we look at the relevance of that content, and that simply means, does it matter to the learner? It may matter to us because it's really important. We think it's something everyone should know, but it needs to be important to the learner, and we'll talk a little bit more about why that is. So is it the right information, and is this learner the right audience? So you've got to make sure that when you start really curating your content for the course, that it's aligned to your learner's needs. And the needs are really what they need to do as a result of this learning. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. But I think all of you have seen at some point or another, if your content isn't aligned, if your learners decide either in the class or virtually, if this content doesn't mean anything to me, they'll tune out. You'll lose them. And it's going to be much like looking at this whiteboard in the slide presentation. Even if you do have the right content, you want to do something to avoid what we call cognitive overload. And there's a theory that says we basically, as humans, have a finite amount of information that we can process through our memory. So if you give learners more than they need, because, and this happens so often, say you only have 4 hours to cover all the content, we'll just go through it faster. You're really not getting anywhere with that, because once your learners hit their limit, they're not able to learn to get something into their memory. So I go by something that someone else told me, who was a very experienced facilitator. Tell them what they need to know and let them go. And it's really hard, especially when you're a subject matter expert, to let go of, oh, this is such great content. They need to know the background. They need to know this. The analysis allows you to determine what's important for the learner to do their job. And then everything else is just going to clutter up that experience. So this is something I've learned the hard way. And I wanted to share that with you because it can make the difference between your learners paying attention and your learners tuning out. Thing to remember about content is it's just the start. So you can have great content, but there are so many more elements that feed into what is a great course. And I've seen a lot of times in a lot of different organizations where content is presented as the training. Let's just put some stuff up on a slide, narrate it, they'll click next, and they'll have some training. And learning is really about interacting with the content, not just passively listening to it, either in a classroom or online. So you need a really great roadmap so that you can create what I call a learning experience. And that's through interactions, discussions, practice, and that's a big thing in nurse aid training. We present a lot of what we call book knowledge. You've got to know about body systems. You've got to know about certain procedures, but you need the hands-on practice. And that's what makes a really great course, because you're reinforcing through application what you've taught. And that's going to get us to point number 2, or component number 2, which is targeted learning outcomes. And that's asking, what do your learners need to do with the information? Now, when we were in school, we learned information because that was the course of study. We had to pass the test. It's important to know your history. It's important to know your social studies. But in the working world, and especially in medical fields, we have people, we have clinicians that need to practice on our clients, our patients, and so they need to apply the information that we teach them. So when you're looking at what content you're going to use, you want to lead with the behavior. So what do they need to do as a result of what we're teaching them? And you can see this chart, we've got a condition and a behavior and a criteria. So if we need our learner to clean a wound, we would look at the behavior, that if they're given a list of steps on how to clean a wound, they should be able to sequence those in the correct order with pretty much 100% accuracy. And that's something that happens actually in nurse aid training, that they'll be in the classroom and they'll learn the steps, commit that to memory, then they go to their skills lab and they can practice it without having to stop and think, oh, I do this, I do this, I do this. So that's really what we're striving for, to support the learner in the behavior that they need to execute on the job. Okay, our third component is that a course is highly engaging. And I really cannot stress this enough. I think all of us have the experience of sitting in a class and being completely lost or completely bored. And that's something that we want to prevent our learners from experiencing. So we want to look at what engagement really means in learning in the field. It's something that we throw around all the time, especially in e-learning. And it's, oh, this is a highly engaging course. And so it really means that you've captured the learner's attention and that you maintain it throughout that course. Again, whether it's online, which can be a little trickier because you have a student behind the computer screen, or in an actual classroom where it may be a little easier to see if you're losing your audience. So I like to look at learning as a transaction. My course provides the engagement. It basically entices the learner to pay attention, and their currency is that actual attention. So they pay attention to my course. And what we want to realize about attention is that it's a key component in memory. If we are paying attention to something, it's going to be committed to our short-term memory, and then through practice, which we do in our nurse aid training, we help reinforce that learning transfer, and that's when things get into your long-term memory. So I find that part of learning really exciting, and I like to build experiences that really help facilitate that attention and that memory. Now, if you think back to maybe high school or even college and going to a lab, I can talk about when I was in chemistry, and I was completely lost in that lab because I hadn't paid attention in the lecture to the foundational concepts. So I had no foundation to practice what we're actually doing in the lab. So that's, from an engagement standpoint, what's really important. And some ways that you can create engagement in your classroom, something we call in the learning arena the WIFM, or the what's in it for me. And this is telling the learner, this is why this content is important to you. This is why you should pay attention. And it can be something like, this will be on the final exam. This is something you need to do on the job. This is a mistake a lot of people make the first time, so I want you to avoid that. You can also use really interesting and informative graphics, and graphics that tell an emotional story, especially faces, because again, they help engage memory. And there's been a lot of studies that show how different graphic elements or faces can actually reinforce memory. The Webster definition of engaged is that they're involved in activity and greatly interested. So that's really what we're striving for when we build engagement into our course. So some things that we look at, we want to make sure it's a smart use of the learner's time. They're going to pay attention if they feel they will benefit from listening. So we look at, is the material covered efficiently? That goes back to, is it the right content? Is this the right audience? And one thing I've found throughout my career is that performance improvement is a big way to get the learner's attention. I think across the board, with rare exception, people want to do their jobs well. And they seek out resources, whether it's training, whether it's a mentor, whether it's coaching, to make sure that they can do a good job at work. And so if you are offering a learner the ability to become better at their job, they're going to pay attention. So the bottom line with this is that your learners are going to feel involved and interested if they feel the course has something to offer them. A little bit about engagement in the classroom. We could really do an entire half-hour webinar just on e-learning engagement, but a lot of our clients are doing their nurse aid training in the classroom, so that's really where I wanted to focus. And, you know, a slideshow is one thing, but really being familiar with the material is so important to engaging the class. If you have your head in your notes, you're not going to scan the room and see that people are on their phones or they're not paying attention. So the more prepared you are, the better able you are to create that engagement and connection with your learners. Get to know your students. Just know their names, know why they're in the classroom, what their goals are. That helps you really speak to what's in it for them. Everyone's going to have a different reason that they're in your classroom. And if you get to know your students, you can engage them even better. And then something that if you've watched any of our webinars, read our white papers, listened to our CEO's minutes on social media, you know, we adore storytelling. So I cannot stress enough, use storytelling to create interest. And it doesn't mean that you are the life of the party kind of storyteller. If you've been on the job and doing well, you've got great experience to share. And if you're working in long-term care, you probably have a lot of really poignant experiences that can speak to what your learners are looking for. So definitely leverage your background to engage the class. Another way to engage the class, not only for attention, but for that performance improvement, is to make sure you've got some kind of assessment and feedback built into the course, because learners strive to do better, but they need to know how they're doing along the way. So as you present your material, you want to put in some self-checks. Just, you know, check in with them. How are we doing with this material? Does it make sense to you? Do you see the importance of this? It doesn't have to be a stressful test. It can just be a very casual check-in with your learners. And then you also want to provide opportunities through discussion and role plays, games, so that you can see how the learners are really mastering your content. You know, ask a question, what would you do in this situation? And see how they respond. Are they using the content that you presented to answer the question? Can you see them kind of making the mental connections in their mind? And if you're not seeing that, it's a great opportunity to gently correct and say that we've actually want to go this way. So I cannot stress enough that, you know, that engagement, that dialogue in the classroom is great. And then providing meaningful feedback. So if the answer is wrong, it doesn't need to be this really stressful thing where you point it out in the classroom. You know, just tell them why and make it a learning experience, and even point to your own mistakes. I do that a lot. I've made this mistake. I totally understand. And, you know, we need to get out of this assessment and feedback as a stressful thing and really leverage it as a dialogue and a learning experience. The fourth thing that I like to do in a great course is create connection. And we've seen a lot of studies that show that the learner's emotions help them to create a connection with the material, with the organization. So they cultivate those positive motivations and attitudes. There's something about what happens in our brain when we have an emotional reaction, whether it's cortisol or oxytocin, but it actually does help that process of memory. So creating connections and helping your learners see, what the motivation is and really identify with the material and the purpose of it can be very helpful in creating that great course that ultimately helps your learners get where they need to go. And finally, you need to motivate your learners. And we know that a motivated learner pays attention. So you have someone who comes into your classroom and maybe they're ambivalent about becoming a nurse aide. They're not sure, they need some encouragement. And you can do that in two ways. There are two types of motivation, and we start with the intrinsic motivation. That's basically something outside them that motivates them. So they want to become a nurse aide. So they need to be motivated to learn the material, pass the test, pass the skills test. That's still extrinsic motivation. But as you get into the material and start discussing what it means to be a nurse aide, you're going to kind of hit on values, belief systems, desire for engagement, even down to their self-worth and competence. So these things shift from, I need to pass this test so I can become a nurse aide, to I want to become a nurse aide because I want to help people. Or I believe it's really important to support people who have worked in our society and now they have retired and need more support. So whatever those internal motivations are, that's something you can do in the classroom to help your learners be motivated. And we know that intrinsic motivation is more effective because it comes from within. Eventually things like fear or reward or social norms lose their potency. So getting to that extrinsic motivation is really important. Some things you want to think about, just how you would communicate in the classroom, what the value is. Why is what you're teaching important to you? And, again, that storytelling can really help other people connect their own motivations to what you're doing. Okay, so we are about at half an hour, and that's the material I've prepared for you. I wanted to leave some time for questions and answers. And so I'm going to open it up to Lindsay to see what we've got in the chat window. And I am happy to answer or clarify anything I've discussed.
All right. So we do have some questions that came through.
Great.
So I'll just read them in order. Okay. Let me pull up that window. All right. So the first question is, how do you balance delivering all the content that's required by the state without giving too much content, especially in a limited number of hours?
Okay. Lindsay, will you read the first part of that question again? You went out on the audio just a little bit.
Oh, sure. Can you hear me a little bit better now?
Yes.
Okay. She asked, how do you balance delivering all of the content that's required by the state without giving too much content, especially in a limited number of hours?
There's really two answers to that. One, you need to cover what is required by your state. So I would not, we work with our chief clinical officer, and she helps me balance out what we absolutely need to cover from a state approval perspective. But there are ways you can do it so that you're doing less just passive presenting, either just slides and lecture, and you can create some activities that cover the same ground, but don't basically overload the student, like we talked about, that cognitive load. The best thing to do, I start with an analysis, look at what I absolutely have to cover and what skills and competencies are supported. And then I align, okay, if they need to do X, I need to support them with this content. And, if you got some more questions about doing, about that question and state alignment, we can definitely follow up. I think our Sherry, our Chief Clinical Officer, could definitely supplement anything I've said about that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Kelly. So the next question is, if a class seems unengaged, do you have any suggestions on ways to get it back on track?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. And the first one is really simple. I use snacks. I have found that snacks are a really great way to make sure people's blood sugar isn't tanking. Mine does a lot. So I try to have some healthy snacks and some sweet snacks available. Another thing I do is an activity that gets them on their feet. So maybe instead of just going through some quiz questions, you have people stand up and get in groups and move around. That's another thing to just help jumpstart that attention. If it happens consistently with your material, then I would look at building in further engagement. We try not to go through, let's say, more than 4 or 5 slides without some type of engagement, whether it's a question or an activity. So as much content as you have, just build in those engagement opportunities so that your learners can stay focused, and then do lots of breaks. We get so rushed to cover the material. Let's just skip over this break. Just protect your breaks, protect your lunch, and get your students up as much as possible to keep them engaged.
All right. And then the next question is a little bit similar to that, but specifically is referring to online courses. So what are some good ways to engage learners with online courses?
Good question. Okay. Yeah, it's a little different than a classroom. And there's a lot of things we do online. If you've ever taken a typical e-learning course, you see a slide, maybe you'll hear some narration and you'll click next. So you definitely want to go beyond that. Animations are another step in that direction. It's a little more engagement, but things like scenarios I find are really great for engagement. And it doesn't even need to be, a really high fidelity media solution. It can just be a word question, even with a nice graphic. As long as it's relevant to the learner, then that's a really effective way to take e-learning to the next level. So scenarios, simulations are a really great way for engagement to happen. Interactive questions, so maybe drag and drops or matching, anything that requires the learner to interact with that online learning experience can create better engagement.
Awesome. All right. Well, those were our questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for attending. If there are any topics we've touched on that you would like to hear about further, definitely let Lindsay or I know. Like I said, I love talking about learning and sharing different techniques. So we're happy to create content for you on anything that you find interesting or need to work on in your own workplace.
Yeah, so what I'll do is tomorrow I'll send out a recording of this webinar and a survey for anyone who attended or watched it to fill out to suggest content or materials that they'd like to see in the future. If there's another webinar that we could do along these lines where you'd like to dive into more details about any of this stuff, we're open to suggestions. So I'll send out a survey along those lines and let you guys give feedback. But if that's everything, I think we can go ahead and call it a day.
Okay, awesome. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks again, everyone. Thanks, Kelly.
Bye.
Bye-bye.